Welcome back to People Analytics. I'm your host, Lindsay Patton. Today I have with me Carolyn Moore, who is the Chief People Officer at Influx Data. Welcome, Carolyn.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. I'm really excited about our conversation and all the things that we have to talk about. But before we get into that, can you share who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Yeah, so I have been in the HR/people ops space for, close to 30 years. And I got into it very similarly to a lot of other people I know, which was we didn't really have the intention to do it. It just happened. My original plan was to become a therapist, and I was trying to make some money so I could go to grad school. And so I started as a recruiter. And then I just decided I really liked this space, and so I progressed there. And from probably a bit early on in my career, I really realized that I liked kind of the bigger picture issues, strategy, et cetera. So worked myself into those types of positions within the people ops space in a lot of different industries, small companies, big companies, medium-sized companies and such, but most of the time it's been in technology.
Wow, so that's really interesting about the therapist interest. So I can imagine that a lot of reasons you've stayed in HR probably have a lot to do with the reasons that you wanted to go into being a therapist, seeing people, helping solve problems. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. I had some conversations with some folks who I knew who were therapists, and they actually said to me, "Hey, you're doing a lot of the same things that we're doing. You're just doing it in a different context." And I thought, that was great. And I'm going to probably be more financially sound if I stay on the HR side of things. So
I know those degrees, they can get expensive.
Exactly. So I stayed on the HR side.
Awesome. Yeah. So what if, you said you've been in the industry for 30 years. I can imagine, you've seen it evolve over time. So what have you really enjoyed about being in, a people leader?
Yeah, and I think it's been the increasing willingness to allow HR, people ops, what have you, whatever you want to call it, into the room, and understanding that we are just as much an expert in a piece of the business that's important as anybody else. I think it was very difficult early on that at least I experienced and saw to actually convince somebody of that. But I did work for a company way back that's no longer around, Sun Microsystems, that really challenged that. And that was sort of the beginning of my crusade, if you will, to make sure we were all let in the room.
Yeah, so I know that a big passion of yours is being a caretaker of your own culture. And so how do you describe that caretaking responsibility that you have?
Yeah, I don't believe that people ops or HR or somebody like myself owns the culture, but we are the conscience, of the culture. And the way that I think about it is anytime we are making any changes, anytime there's a transition, anytime that we're looking at doing something new, I really look at it through the lens of the culture and how is this going to affect the culture? Cultures do evolve, they do change, but you want to be intentional about that change. And so that's where I feel like I come in. It's taking a look at how might we need to adjust something in order to make sure that this change is successful and that it matches what we're trying to do here at the company.
Absolutely. So one thing that you do is create checks and balances. So to make sure that you operate within that culture. So what are some of those checks and balances that keep you on course?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer in making sure that everything that we do from a process standpoint, any policies, it comes down to performance management, which, by the way, I hate that term. So I'm struggling with, like, what do I replace this with? Um, but all of the things that we do need to really match. And that's the checks and balances as far as I'm concerned. Now, one of the things that I think is important also is that everybody in the company can articulate what this culture is and what those values are and how to operate in accordance with those things. So I think that that's something that does provide a check and balance sort of situation as well. So if your employees all know, understand, and feel ownership for the values, the vision, the mission, all of those things, they will check each other, including the executives, on whether or not we're doing what we need to do in order to keep this culture. I can say in my current company, I hear a lot of that, back and forth. It's like, wow, this is great, but will that change the culture, or will that be within the bounds of how we're trying to operate?
Yeah. And one thing that you said that stood out to me was that everyone has to be aligned. Every employee should be able to say that culture. And so one thing that I, have learned talking to people leaders and being part of Staff Geek is that you can have a document or you can have something on the wall that has your culture, but that is not it day to day. Your actions are different. So, how do you make sure, Staff Geek exists to make sure that those actions exist, and those words are the same? So, what do you do to make sure that those words and actions are uniform?
Yeah. Well, I think the words are important, but the words have to be meaningful, and you have to be able to um, ensure that it's sort of ingrained in you as an employee, as well as any of the executives across the company. One of the things that I think about in that regard is a book by Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage, and what he has is a model that I think allows us to look at all of these different areas that we need to articulate in order to have that culture and in order to be a good leader. And so this is something that I know we've done at InfluxData, as well as in another company. And the simpler you can make it, and the more, so it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. The simpler you can make it and the more articulate you can be about what it is that you're trying to do, I think that starts that process. So in a past company, we also utilized this model, and we had a slide that we showed, and we do it at this company as well at Influx. We show a slide at every all hands, and it's the same slide, and it says all the same stuff. And if anybody has any comments about it, they're invited to talk about it. And I think that helps with the check and balance. In a previous company that we did this, we also expected people to commit it to memory. But they were very short statements, and I thought it was very elegant. So it's not just that, but that at least starts the process. And then you can very easily take that and for instance, I'll take performance management. How are you judging performance at this company in accordance with that culture? For instance, I'll say at Influx Data, one of the values that we have is, the ability to make mistakes and learn from them, right? So when you're doing your performance management processes, which we do kind of throughout the year, we don't have a point in time at all. We have 2 times when we ask that you just register that you've had these conversations, but we expect those conversations to happen all the time. But that's one of the things where we say, hey, did you make a mistake? All right, what happened as a result of that? And you can, I think, very easily celebrate that mistake if it drove some additional innovation. And that's all part of what our culture is about. If we're trying to drive innovation, we can't stifle taking a risk and making mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a, really refreshing way to think of things, because if you keep doing the same thing and you're good at it, are you going to grow? Probably not.
Yeah, agreed.
And so, speaking of growth, I know that you're also very passionate about developing leaders and, making sure that those leaders know what to do and know how to support their teams. So tell me about your role in leadership development.
Yeah. So I'm the person who uses the word empathy and empathetic probably the most in the company. Like if I were to be associated with any word, it's probably that. But I've been really kind of preaching this for a long time now. The old school approach of being a leader has really been about, I got to have all the answers and I'm going to tell you what to do. And it's sort of this, policing sort of thing as well. And I've been really working very hard leadership development wise, particularly with first level and second level managers, to make sure that they, take that and kind of sweep that away and think more about being empathetic, understanding what the employee is bringing to the party and helping them to figure out what to do, not by telling, but by coaching, by asking good questions. And I think that that's a, that's a skill that needs to be developed. But what I find is once leaders have got the hang of it, if you will, it makes it so much easier on them, honestly. You lead to a different place.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you said the policing, my mind just flashed back to, the bad leaders that I had and, the things they've said, like, this is a dictatorship. But, one boss told me, you need to do whatever I say because I'm the owner of the company. Another one said, and that didn't really motivate me to want to do a good job at all.
Right. I think about a leader that I worked with who was just amazing at this. And, I still struggle to think about when he ever told me to do something.
Interesting.
Yet, all of us would put our bodies on the train track for this guy. Right? So it was an experience where I felt like I was allowed to have a lot of room for discretion, and I had the ability to ask questions that I maybe hadn't been able to ask before out of, some level of fear. So I think the secret for him, there were a lot of things about him, I think that were fairly unique. However, I think the secret with him was he entered this leadership journey of his with the mindset that I have specific skills and I know specific things. I can't know everything. But I become, as I go up the ladder in leadership, is somebody who enables as opposed to somebody who is a straight doer. And I have to be an expert in this. It changes as you rise higher in an organization. So he really took that enabler role on very directly and very seriously. So, conversations were always about, what do you need from me? How can I take away some of the barriers to what you're trying to do? What are your thoughts on this, whatever that topic was? So that's what I recall about most of my interactions with him. And I thought he was well known as an extraordinary leader.
Yeah. And so, as you were talking, you said two things, two words specifically, enabler, which is typically a negative word in a negative situation. And I really love how you spun it to be positive, how this leader spun it. And also another word was fear. And it just made me realize how much fear there is in the workplace in general. So yeah, can we talk about that a little bit? Because it's something that I think is, is too prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, about fear in the workplace. And I think that just the structure of the workplace has driven that. We've, as a society, for a long time, have driven a model into the workplace that's very militaristic. If you will, hierarchical, and if you don't do this, this happens. Those kinds of things. It's very, very clear, but in a very kind of black and white sort of way, as opposed to there's no gray on there. And I think we're finally getting to a point where we're realizing that just doesn't help.
Yeah.
Doesn't build, I guess, confidence. It doesn't build responsibility throughout the organization, those kinds of things. So one of the things that I've done, for the last maybe 10 years or so, is really try to drive performance discussions as more feedback. Maybe that's what I'll stop calling performance management, call it feedback. Without ratings, without anything that points in the direction of like good or bad, because I just don't think there's a lot of good or bad. There are things that are helpful and maybe not as helpful. There are things to focus on and shifting from one thing to another. But by having a 5-point scale or whatnot, and then we took the 5-point scale, which is very much like being at school.
Yeah.
Right. And then we decided, we're not going to, assign a number to it. Now we're going to assign something like, exceptional performance, things like that. And it's just categorizing things like that. I just think is an easy way out of actually having real discussion.
Yeah.
And and what I mean by that is, anytime that we're all talking about how we work, we have things that we are really excited about, that we've done, that we're really proud of, and things that were just not working.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, if you're going to be in that kind of a performance management structure, it's hard for you to say, this isn't working and this did not go well, without thinking there's going to be retribution involved.
Absolutely.
So that's why I've taken all of that stuff out, and essentially at our company, I'm looking at changing it up a little bit to be a little bit more helpful. But we kind of have essentially a stop, start, continue kind of scenario for giving feedback. But lots more work needs to be done on that. I think that was a simple way, but I think we have to be a little bit more innovative, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to shake after you get out of that environment too. I work with an organization, and they do, twice a year, they do check-ins. And at first I was like, an annual review? Oh my God, I'm so scared. But it's just, like you said, a conversation. Are you doing the things that you want to do? Are you getting the support you need? Do you have any feedback for us? Here's what you're excelling at. And it was just so easy.
Yeah, it's easy. And the other thing that traditional performance management processes tend to ignore is the conversation you need to have about the career. And so that's another thing to weave in is, so what do you want to do? And what I'm also trying to work with managers on is to have this understanding and this empathy for, folks may not be able to get all of their career goals accomplished at this company. So how can you as a leader help influence them even when they move on.
Yeah.
And I think what's important, as far as I'm concerned, is, I'm working in a company that could be the person who leaves, even if they decide they need to move on, they could very well be in the decision-making process for buying our products. So
It's true.
let's, let's just be generally helpful, whether they're planning to stay for 5 years or, 2.
Yeah, and I think a habit in the workforce is loyalty, and expecting that, and getting ego in when people do choose to leave and grow, and you can't fault someone for wanting to do something for themselves.
Yeah.
We all have to work, so if there's something out there that's attractive, more beneficial, then yeah, don't blame someone for going after it.
No, and it just, I keep thinking about, if that were me and I was looking for something else, I'd want my manager to help support me in that. But we've, again, set up this structure in society around companies and this loyalty. But nonetheless, if we are going to run into financial trouble, we aren't necessarily going to hesitate putting people's names on that list to do a riff. So, the loyalty does not go both ways in that regard. So I hate to think about loyalty at all. What I tend to think about is, we have something that we have to do here, and we want to create the best environment for you to operate in that. And we want to create a situation where whatever experience you get from this, you take away as being positive and helpful to your career.
Yeah, and I know that you're, all about leaders being humble, and I think you really, really have to be humble to, say, yeah, this person that I work with that I really enjoy, they're not getting everything they need. Let's explore some options.
Right, exactly. I mean, one of the things that I think a lot about is vulnerability in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you can put away that, that face of, I know everything and I'm in charge of you,
Yep.
kind of thing, it really takes it down to the person-to-person level. And we're all just here trying to get something done and, making this thing a success. And, along the way, I also want something out of that as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for, everybody who's in that conversation. So I keep going back to Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, who really talks about that vulnerability, like, hey, I don't know everything. Let's learn this together. Or, you may have this information that I do not have. And so I respect that and I value that. And that's a hard message to a lot of leaders who've been doing it for a long time, who really think, I gotta know everything.
Yeah. And I see so much value in leaders who are also like, if it's got to get done, then I'm going to be doing this work by your side, and just kind of rolling their sleeves up. And, there's something to be said about a leader that is vulnerable and, wants to be within, their staff too.
Right. Really understanding the work and understanding the individuals doing the work. I mean, I think that that's important. What I've talked to a lot of folks about this is that they don't necessarily want a leader who knows exactly how to do everything, but they want somebody who's going to guide them and who's got a good strategic mind about being able to think how that work aligns with the mission of the company and how we are going to get to whatever that North Star is that we're trying to get to. And that's the role. Like, you as a leader need to articulate that and be able to show that connection between your team and that North Star and how we're gonna get there.
Yeah.
It's bigger picture stuff that you really do need to be real good at. The other stuff, that's why you have people doing the work.
Yeah. Yep, hire people you trust and trust
Right.
them to do the work.
Right.
So I know that, we're talking about getting to know people, getting to know their jobs, and I know that's really important for you. It's something that you told me when we first connected was that people can't be predicted. So it's important to have those face-to-face conversations, those conversations happening where people are doing the work. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, one of the areas that I think we ignore sometimes as leaders because we sometimes think we're being a little too nosy, maybe, is really understanding the employee that you have. I mean, that's a big part of engagement. And just by running data, you can't figure that part out,
Yeah.
like where the motivation is coming from. For instance, I had just had a conversation with a consultant and talking about how important it is to really understand, like, what are their kids' names?
Mm.
Where did they come from? How did they, meaning, like what's their story? The things that you don't get in an interview situation
Yeah.
because you can't, but
Mhm.
you can start talking about things once they're on board. Obviously you have to take cues from the employee. They're going to
Yeah.
tell you what they want to tell you. That's their prerogative and they're right. But showing that interest and who they really are as a person, I think makes a big difference. And until you have that, it's real hard to figure out whether or not you're going to be able to have a trusting relationship that allows for an employee to say, hey, I'm not happy, or
Mm.
this isn't going well, and I really want to change something. I think that's it. That's really important. We
Yeah.
miss that, I think, a lot. And now with so much AI, chat GPT, et cetera, all good stuff, but we can't just assume that we're going to be able to make all the decisions that are, possible when it involves a human being with just,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I view it as a tool and to support rather than take over. And when you use it to support, it can do great things, but that human element tells us so much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I love the idea of chat GPT and AI in certain, areas. Certain areas, it's a little sketchy, at least
Yeah.
right now. But I think you use that, as you said, as a tool, as a way of even beginning a conversation.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but you can't not have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I use it to help with writer's block.
Yes.
If I am unsure of what to write, I'll type something in and, oh, okay, now I can say this in my own words. I have something, I have more ideas, I can do this. So it's just when you rely on it, that's when things get bad.
Yeah. I mean, there was a recent situation in the news about an attorney who used it and the
Oh, boy.
citations were incorrect. And so, that to me is just a red flag to just, it's not the thing. It will help you get to a point where you can say, okay, I can now take this and take what I have in my brain and what I know and apply it.
Right.
I mean, the thing that I worry about, not necessarily with chat GPT, but AI specifically, and I was just in a conference about a week ago on various things, which also included a fair amount of AI discussion, and was really about how we've tried to, at least as a function, be very mindful about diversity and ensuring
Mhm.
that we have, good balanced teams across the organization. And now AI applications going into recruiting and applicant tracking and selection and things like that
Mhm.
really becomes an issue.
Yeah.
This is not perfected yet, and
No.
the EEOC has basically said we need to watch out on that because that could have some real bias on it. So it's things like that where it might be helpful from a procedural perspective, but again, it's back to we need to use our brains and our knowledge that we have in order to make sure that we're making the right choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk a little bit about, the evolving nature of HR before we wrap up. Something that I noticed that is that empathy, that, the word that you use is a running theme over, throughout who's shaking things up and who's helping HR evolve. What do you think the HR landscape will look like in the future, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to predict, actually, because I don't know that we could have predicted this whole ChatGPT AI thing to the degree that it's come up now. But what I would say is, and I do hope, just sort of based upon the conversations I have with maybe the folks on my team who are newer in their career, is that everybody is very interested in how the business runs and what the connection is to the business, and making those connections not only for themselves but for the employees in the company. And so I do see the continuing trend of being much more involved in how the business runs, and having the understanding of strategy. I would say that my function as the head of people ops or HR, whatever it's called in the company that they're in, it's really about strategy and possibly even driving a lot more general strategic processes, particularly in smaller companies where you don't have a chief strategy officer or something like that. So I think that's a way of really evolving the function, because we do have a good purview. We have an overarching view of the company, and just being more involved in understanding the real nuts and bolts of the business, as we've been saying for years, I think then just adds to that and gives you more credibility as somebody who's trying to push strategy into the company. I also believe that there's going to be a lot more oversight around innovation and creativity, and how that enables or puts at risk employees. Especially, I keep coming up with AI mostly because I hear it all the time, right? Daily. But I think that one of the things that we need to do, and we will probably be doing, is really watching that balance between innovation and maybe going too far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Employees. So I think that's kind of where it's going. We do have to be really very fluent with data. We will continue to have to be very fluent with data, but what we have to do is get better at prediction, at what do we do with that data? When do we pay attention to it? When is it important? When is it not important? How much emphasis do we put on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carolyn, this has been a great conversation. I have enjoyed just getting to know your brain and how it works in the realm of HR. So if people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, probably the best way is send me an email at cmoore@influxdata.com or follow me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, if you or anyone you know is like Carolyn who wants to help create a better space for people, email me, Lindsay@staffgeek.com. Thank you for listening to Staff Geek's People Analytics Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Patton, and I'm always looking to interview leaders who put people first. If you or someone you know lead with a people-first mindset, please email me at lindsay@staffgeek.com. That's LINDSAY@staffgeek.com. If you want to take things a step deeper and understand your organization's true culture DNA, I encourage you to take Staff Geek's free culture assessment. Just head to staffgeek.com and click the button that says Free Culture Assessment. Thanks again for listening.